Okay, now I'd like to talk a bit about shock absorbers. Shock absorbers are there on the car to capture the spring oscillations, and it does this by converting that energy into heat energy via the oil inside the shock absorber. We have two main types of shock absorbers. This one here is what we call a twin tube shock absorber. A twin tube shock absorber can have gas pressure or have no gas in it, but they always have oil in it. You'll notice the outer casing here, and then we have the inner casing. We have the main piston, the foot valve, and the top seal. The oil is forced through the piston and the foot valve with tiny shims underneath that to control the amount of flow that's allowed through the piston. Then we move on to the second type of shock absorber, which is a monotube shock absorber. This one is much larger in diameter, and the oil acts directly on the outer housing. So the cooling capabilities of a monotube are much better than a twin tube. You also get a lot more oil inside the shock absorber. And as you can see, as we push this shock absorber down, the oil is flowing through the main piston. The floating piston has gas pressure underneath and slowly collapses away. So the oil and gas are separated in a monotube, whereas in a twin tube, the gas and the oil are mixed together. Now, if you'd like to follow me into the other room, we'll see a dyno operated to see how the shock absorber works. Okay, here we are in the dyno room. We've got a dyno shock absorber set up on the dyno. It's a great tool to have because we can put any shock absorber on there and test it. We can change the stroke of the actual machine for short range or long range shock absorbers, and it lets us find faults like noisy foot valves, creaking noises, to eliminate a lot of noises. So we'll run one through a cycle now. Okay, here we have the temperature probe, which we wrap around the body of the shock absorber. As I previously mentioned, a monotube shock absorber dissipates heat much better than a twin tube shock absorber because the oil is acting directly on the body of the shock absorber. This is why most of your track cars or track days will be using a monotube shock absorber. They get very, very hot, and after a minute or two of operation, you can barely even touch a monotube shock absorber. Whereas this twin tube that has just been running, you can put your hand on it for an extended period of time without getting too hot. Okay, the machine itself has a yoke down the bottom and a load cell at the top, and is rigged up to the computer. So as the machine goes through its cycle, the high speed and low speed of the shock absorber is recorded and then translated into a graph for us to view. So if you want to follow me now, we'll have a look at the graph. Okay, so we've just run that shock absorber on the dyno, and this is the graph that we have. We have two sides to the graph on the X and Y axis. The top replicates the bump, which is the downward movement, and the bottom is the rebound when the shock absorber extends back up. As you can see, the rebound is quite a lot higher than the bump side. That's because the spring is in the car and acts as the bump as well. We have two main, if you split the graph up into two main sections, you have a low speed and a high speed. This is millimeters per second displacement over force in Newton meters. And basically, to replicate a low speed bump would be rolling through a corner. And your high speed is more your sharp bumps over the road, potholes, where the shock absorber is at a really high frequency. With the teen shock absorbers, we have a minimum and maximum setting. As you can see here, this is the minimum setting we've just brought up, and we have that larger scope coming down here in your low speed, so when you start to, if you want to go out on the track and do a bit of track work, you can ramp it up and get a bit more feel through the corners. If we compare those two graphs to an OE graph, there we go. You can see that the OE is built mainly for comfort, and it drops away down the bottom here for comfort over your sharp bumps.